Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our North Camp Support Group Hustings for St Mark's Ward. I'm going to hand you over to Jack Beard, the chair, in a couple of minutes, or even less. For you, you have to ask your questions through the Q&A function. I see we've got a couple of questions already, which is great. We haven't seen them before, as you know, and then we'll copy them through to the chair, who will ask the candidates these questions. We have, as you can see, we've got Emily and Carl Hewitt here, who will introduce themselves in a minute. Di Bedford's just contacted us to say she's unwell, but sends huge apologies to North Camp Support Group and you, the attendees, for her absence. So in a minute, I'm going to disappear. Well, not literally. I'm just going to mute myself and stop my video and hand over to Jack. So welcome. We think this is a great idea, and we hope by the end of the session, you also think the same. We are recording this. Okay, over to you, Jack.
Thank you. I'm Jack Beards, and I'm going to chair this meeting. And we have two candidates present today. One is Carl Hewitt for Labour and Emily Mitchell for the Liberal Democrats. You've heard that Diane Bedford sends her apologies. She can't attend today. So that's who we have today. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and give an idea of their intentions if they are elected as councillors, and then we'll go into the questions and answers. They'll be provided. I will see them on the screen in my chat box. And I should say that we have a number of other questions which have already been submitted early before the session. So I'll try and fit some of those in as well. And depending on the number of questions which come up, I'm hoping that we can get through as many as possible, but it may not be possible to include all the questions that are submitted if there are too many to fit in, because we need to finish at 8 o'clock today. So that's how it's going to be. And for the candidates, I'm going to say that each of their speeches and answers would like to limit to around 2 minutes, if that's all right, so we can get as much in as possible. So with that, unless anybody's got any queries for me, we shall move on to giving some questions. Right, well, I have a question here, which I'll put to Emily to start with. With the closure of Farnborough Leisure Centre and the introduction of a new leisure contract for all shop pools, there are a number of community swimming clubs who are being denied pool time by the council and Places Leisure. Each club has 100 swimmers each and have been teaching swimming for 40 years. We'd like to know how you would go about working with the clubs involved to help safeguard their futures so that the children in our borough can continue learning to swim at affordable prices. So that's that, and I'll ask Emily to answer that.
So I think it's not acceptable that it's closed early. It was never the plan, and I don't think that the council have prepared for it well enough. My children do swimming lessons, or did do swimming lessons at Farnborough Rec. I think the only way that we're going to be able to ensure that people can still attend their clubs and things like that is to strike up contracts with like the Garrison swimming pool and Camberley and Aldershot. But to be honest, until it's demolished, I would prefer if it stayed open, and I would happily fight the cause to keep it open. I just don't think it's acceptable that it's closed for 4 years.
Thank you. Obviously, the same question to go to Carl, please.
All right, the question was really, how are you going to help the clubs? I think the only way that they can be helped is for the council to step up and start helping arrange alternative places for them to carry out their activities. It's not the best scenario. This isn't absolute catastrophe for, well, it's not just for Rushmoor that the leisure centre is closing. It's not just a catastrophe for us. There are also other people around the area, people in, for example, Frimley Green or Ash or Mitchett, that also use the leisure centre. It's a total, I think it serves a community of around 94,000, 95,000 in Rushmoor. That's Rushmoor residents, but it's not including those local to it, which also use it. The problem is, I think, for me with the closure of the leisure centre is we all know that the leisure centre needs to be redone. I've known about it for years that it needs to be upgraded, but now is not the time to do it. And if it costs money, because this is basically an horrendous mistake by the Conservatives, it should never have happened. We should never have got ourselves into a situation. They need to hold their hands up and cough up the money. Where they get it from, I don't know. Perhaps they need to go and ask the Johnsons. He seems to be handing out a lot of money to his friends and contacts everywhere. So maybe they need to put their hands up and go and ask them. But it can be saved, but there has to be the will. And it's an absolute tragedy for the people of not just Rushmoor, but the surrounding area, that we're not going to have a leisure centre for the next, well, they say 3 years, but you know what it's like. It's 3 years, 4 years. Once it's gone, we may never even get it back at all.
Thank you, Carl. Now, the next question here goes as follows. Are you aware of the gargantuan sound stages which have been erected without planning permission on the airfield? This is jumping about. Well, that's a question. I've got it in a different format here. I can't see it, but essentially, the skeleton of these sound stages has already been completely erected before we received our invitation to comment letters, which were dated the 15th of March. Since then, the framework is now being enclosed and is cutting off more view and sun from the properties in the Maitland Road area. How can you, as a local councillor, stop the current breach of planning from progressing and being finished, and stop anything like this happening again to the residents of St Mark's? And clearly that's the matter concerning the airfield. So I'll ask Carl that question to start with.
I have to be honest, I've not heard of this. I am aware, I'm going to go and check it out. I am aware that they do an awful lot of filming. So when you say soundstage, is that to do with filming, or is it to do with a concert or something? I actually don't know. I will check this out. I don't know the answer to your question. With regards to planning permission, well, that's the council's job, is to make sure that the planning permission is in place and correct and is adhered to. And too many times in Rushmoor, unfortunately, the planning that has been given has not been adhered to. It's been changed. We know that with social housing in certain apartments that are being built, that have been frankly cancelled from 20% to 0%. It's a similar kind of thing where people seem to be, they get planning permission, then go do their own thing, but regardless of the planning permission. As I say, I'm not aware of what's going on. I will endeavour to find out.
Thank you, Carl. Next question, and I'll ask Carl first on this. How will you tackle?
Do I get to answer that one?
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Right. Emily, can you comment on that one? Answer that one.
Yeah, so I do know a little bit about it. I noticed them when I went for a walk a couple of weeks ago. So I've done a little bit of digging, and they've built it as an at-risk development, a temporary structure. So that means that they can construct it and then apply for planning permission, but it's at risk because they would then be liable for any cost of removing it, which I don't think is right and I don't think is fair. And I think that the residents of the surrounding area should have definitely been contacted and consulted beforehand. So we've actually, as the Liberal Democrats, have been actively asking people to comment on the planning permission application. because frankly they are huge. They're absolutely massive structures, and they're definitely blocking people's light and their views, and they should have been consulted first. So if you haven't already, add your comments to the planning application.
Thank you, Emily. And I apologise for almost leaving you out. I didn't
That's
mean.
all right, don't worry.
On to the next question. How will you tackle Rushmoor Borough Council on the issues of climate change in following areas: heating and insulation in new build houses, plastic packaging in shops and supermarkets, palm oil in everyday products such as bread and biscuits, cars and other vehicle emissions? So I'll ask that to Emily first.
So I don't know how much we can do on the borough council other than incentivise, you know, not using palm oil, and you know, giving monetary incentives to home builders in our area to make sure that they're insulating properly and things like that. And I know that a lot of the shops on North Camp High Street, they're not using plastic bags at all. They're using paper bags. The tea shops all in recyclable packaging. So people are already making that move, and I think it's about supporting them and allowing them to do what they know is the right thing, which is reducing the use of plastic bags and palm oil and things like that.
Thank you, Emily. Carl asked the same question.
Okay, I mean, that's a huge question, is how do we solve the climate crisis in the space of this time and in St Mark's? I wrote down some of the things you were saying. Heating, insulation. Well, I don't know what the council can do individually on a local level, and particularly for St Mark's. I think that's the sort of thing that has to be done at a national level, and it needs to be enforced by law. I think this is probably one of the most important things we do, because we lose a lot of heat through our houses, and our houses are notoriously inefficiently insulated. We have for quite some time been able to build what are called houses to house standard, and it's not a new thing, it's an old thing, but yet we still don't do it. There are still houses being built today that are to a standard that was 10 or 20 years ago, not to passive house standards. There is no reason why any development in Farnborough or Aldershot should not be done to a standard whereby we can minimise people's bills and minimise impact to the environment. And for packaging and plastics and palm oil, again, I think that's a national issue, but what we could do perhaps locally is incentivise, as was said earlier, but maybe if people are to remove plastics from their packaging, etc., or remove palm oil from their products, maybe we could cut their business rate tax just a couple of % or something like that to encourage them. Unfortunately, people don't make the change sometimes, unless it's either too late or they're forced to do it. And sometimes you have to take affirmative action, like giving people a discount to encourage them, get them on the right path. And once they're on the right path, they stay there.
Thank you, Carl. Now, I'll go on to another question here. I have a query for the prospective candidates. At present, there is only one allotment area in North Camp. The council has stopped adding people to the waiting list, all of Rushmoor for the moment. This shows that there is a demand for more allotments. How could this be accommodated in North Camp, or could we have a community allotment space? This could benefit so many residents as regards building relationships and collective spirit within the area, education, for instance, children helping and learning, the joy of gardening. So that's to do with allotment space. And I'll ask Emily first.
Yeah, so the other day I walked down by Farnborough North Station, and they've actually repurposed the garden of the railway cottages, the station master, and they've made that a community garden, and they've got beehives, and at the very end they've got some community allotment spaces, and that's all been funded by the forget what the Farnborough Street Residents Association. They've done that, and they've got some funding from the railway and things like that. And I thought it was just incredible. I thought it was just the best idea ever. And if we could do something like that, I mean, we've got space that we could repurpose, and we could use that, some of that space, for allotments and community gardens and things like that. So yeah, I've got a lot of ideas of of that.
Thank you, Emily. And Carl, have your observations on that?
Observations on that. I'm of the opinion that allotments should be a protected thing in this country. I think they're extraordinarily important, not just for mental health, but for just good living, because you can simply grow your own food. And most people, especially around this, live in flats where they don't have gardens. So I think what we need to do is think about how we're going to reuse the space that we have, and if necessary, create more allotments, because if there's the demand, hell, crikey, make them. It's just brilliant for people to be out gardening. You have the community spirit, you're growing your own fruit, you're growing your own vegetables. Just a positive win-win thing for everybody. There's a great success story in Cherrywood where the Labour Council have put together the community garden there, and it's a great success. I think we should have more of them, and if necessary, I don't actually think it needs council money spending on it, because I think the community are so involved. If they're given the space, they will deal with it. I think it's just a win-win to have more allotments.
Thank you, Carl. Now, the next question I have is kind of related to that. It says a lack of affordable community space in Rushmoor, such as that provided by the old Ellis Hall, is a problem for small community groups. What will the candidates do to support small community groups, and will they support subsidies to allow those groups to meet at reasonable rates? Examples of such groups might be a board game club, a church choir, practice flower arranging, and so on. So, Carl, can I ask you to answer that question?
Yep. Well, of course, we've lost a lot of our community space now because of the wreck. The leisure centre is going to be closing, and that provided an important port of call for people who wanted to do those activities. I've used it myself for community activities. And Ellis Hall as well. Again, it's a shame. It's another failure of this Conservative council, that we are left in a position where we have very few community services. So how do we, community places which to hold sports or games or meetings or anything. So what can we do? Well, we just have to reuse what we've got already. We have plenty of church spaces for halls and things, but again, that's limited on size. Or the residents or local people from Rushmoor and St Mark are going to have to frankly go elsewhere. We can convert buildings, but we've got to get the buildings to make them into community spaces, and cost money. And I don't think we're going to get the money for that.
Thank you, Carl. Next question, move on. Greater Rushmoor Action for Peace, GRAFP, oppose all arms fairs hosted in Rushmoor, including the air show and DPRTE. Do you support arms fairs? So, Emily, what do you say to that?
No, I don't agree in arms fairs in respect to just selling to anybody that can afford it. I think that there needs to be a thorough vetting process. I mean, I would love for it not to be a thing at all, but it's not going to be something that the council are just going to say, yeah, all right, no, we don't want that anymore, get rid of it, because it brings in a lot of money, and that's horrible, but it's true. So I think the only thing that we'd be able to do is to bring in a vetting process, a strict vetting process, that means that we weren't selling to people with dubious human rights records. But yeah, as I say, I'm much more of a pacifist. I'm not a big fan of the arms fair at all.
Thank you. Carl, your answer to that question?
Well, I'm categorically against the arms fair for a start. I do appreciate where we live. I do appreciate that Aldershot is around the corner, it's military, and also the fact of the history of the airport. Myself, I'm an aeronautical engineer. I was trained on military aircraft in the Royal Aircraft Establishment, as it was. I am in favour of the air show for the moment. I'm not in favour of the arms fair, and I think those are two completely different things. If the air show could continue without the arms fair, I'd be reasonably happy about it. I realise that's a stance to take, which is probably negative towards green activities, but we are an airport, and that is Farnborough. So we do have to live with the fact, although the air traffic's obviously going to decline over time, people are still going to use aircraft, and they still are going to sell them. They're not going to disappear. So I would be supportive of the air show. I am not supportive of the arms fair, regardless of where it is. It's not something I would like to be associated, or Farnborough to be associated with.
Thank you, Carl. Now, another different question. As a parent in South Farnborough, I would like my children to be able to walk and cycle more safely to the local schools. What action would the candidates take to help and encourage more cycling and walking to schools and less short car journeys, e.g. school runs? That's that question, and I'll ask Carl to answer that first.
Well, I think that everybody needs, not just children. I know that was particularly mentioned in that, but I think cycling and walking applies to all people, not just children. It's a great method of exercise, and it's just good for the soul to be out, walking about or cycling about. It doesn't pollute the environment, doesn't cost any money, but it is quite hard to go cycling around here. I cycle. The cycle paths are there, but they're not very good. We need to have a lot of investment. I guess that probably come down from a county or a national level rather than a local level. But we need to have that facilities and that infrastructure to enable people to walk and cycle to school. And it benefits everybody. It's less roads on the car, less cars on the road, less pollution, and better healthy people. And especially coming after something like the pandemic, where mental health is a massive issue for people. We all know that cycling and walking and getting exercise and fresh air is just one of the most beneficial things you can do. But in order to do that, you really do need to have the infrastructure, and you need to have the investment to do that. And we should be spending a lot more money on things like cycle paths and those sort of facilities, and the destinations where to park your bike where you get there as well.
Emily, I've had a note to say I forgot to ask you to answer the previous question. So could you do that, answer that question about communities, and then go on to answer the last question about cycling?
Which one was that? Was that about the community spaces being shut down?
Community safest spaces. Yes, that's right.
So yeah, I think very similar to what Carl said, we need to use what we have and repurpose what we have. And of course, I'd fully be supportive of helping to fund, and subsidise these clubs that have had to move out of the areas that they were previously in. I think it's a crying shame, especially now with everything that's been going on. We haven't been able to see people, we haven't been able to go to clubs, and now we're allowed soon to start mixing again, and the available spaces are just closing down one by one, and it's not right. And yeah, I'll definitely fully support subsidising those club memberships. That one.
Let's go on to the next one. Sorry, I've backed you up a bit, but
yes, about cycling to school.
Cycling. Yeah.
Yes. So my children also go to school in North Camp, and we walk every day. Admittedly not far, but we walk to school every day. And I think one of the main issues is the speed of cars that are just bombing it around these roads. And so I think we need to maybe have some speed traps during school runs and things like that, because once people get caught, they're not going to do it again. You would hope not, anyway. And also, there's an idea that I've been thinking of making some of the roads one way for certain hours of the day, so that you would be a lot safer cycling and walking and getting to school. There's, as Carl said, there is cycle paths, but they're not great. They're not clearly signposted a lot of the time as well. So there's people cycling where they shouldn't be, on the pavements when they shouldn't be. So it's all about, you know, incentivizing people to do it by improving the facilities that we've got, and you know, and signposting them and saying, look, there's a really safe route that you can go here, and we're reducing the speed, we're making sure people aren't speeding, because it's really important to be able to walk to school and cycle to school. It's so important for your mental health, to chat to your kids after school. It's great. And yeah, so I think reducing, well, or clamping down on speeding cars, and also signposting to the safe routes that we have, as well as increasing them.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, I'll ask the next question. I'll ask Emily. How do you plan to help residents who want to build their own homes? Self-built plots were due to be part of the Wellesley development. David Clifford told me that these were due to be near to the runway's end. There's a sign-up list held by the council, but there have been silence regarding the timing, size of plot and the cost. So I'll ask Emily first.
So I didn't even know this was a thing. This is fantastic. It's a dream of mine and my husband's to build our own home. So I think we just need to make sure that the developers that have, you know, offered this actually stick to their promises, because they need, sometimes they say we're going to do this many affordable housing, we're going to do this much shared ownership, so on and so forth, and it doesn't actually come to fruition. So it would be a case of putting pressure on the developers to ensure that they stick to their guns and they do what they've said they're going to do. But it's a fantastic idea. I didn't even realise. That's a brilliant idea. Yeah.
And okay, thank you, Emily. And ask Carl to answer the same question.
Excuse me. I want to see more residents building their own homes, purely because, from a financial perspective, it puts them any profit that they make creating their home, they put that profit in their back pockets rather than in developers' pockets of 20% they farmed off to your account in the Cayman Islands or wherever it is. And not only that, but when you allow people to develop their own properties, you intrinsically you build character into the environment. You don't get a street full of houses that are exactly the same or variations on a thing. You get individual character houses, and pretty sure that if you're going to be building your own self-built house, you're going to pay attention to the insulation, because it's your house. You're not doing it for profit, you're doing it for yourself. So you'll probably have an extremely ecologically friendly home. I fully support it. I didn't know that the council were holding up on that. I will ask some questions for you and find out some more about that. But well, I just wish there were more places for people to build their home. And I think it's a massive wasted opportunity on Wellesley development not to allow more building plots for people to build their own homes. So it costs people much less money. It costs them less over lifetime, and that gives people more money to put it back into the local economy and spend locally. Again, it's again a good thing. But when you're paying money to the large developers, the money goes out. It disappears out of the local area into their bank account. But when it stays with the family or the person who built it, they were liable to spend it. And when they build their house, they're probably liable to use local builders and local plumbers and a local electrician. All that money stays in the economy, and all that's been completely lost through letting these large companies develop massive housing estates.
Thank you, Carl. I'll ask the next question. Short question. Would you support a community centre in North Camp? Where could it be, and how could we get funding? And I'll ask Emily first.
Yeah, 100%. 100% support it. One of the places that I've been thinking would be good would be the West Indian Society building, where Pippin's preschool is, near the Queen's Road Park. I think that would be a fantastic space, because you've got all the green outside. And I'd fully support any funding. I'd back anything or raise anything that would get that done, because I think we need it. We desperately need it in this area. So yes, I definitely would.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Carl, same question.
A community centre in North Camp. Well, to be quite honest, it's been needed for quite a considerable amount of time, isn't it? There are opportunities to build something or create a community centre in existing places, just like the West Indian Centre, like Emily said. But what I would like to do is what I would like to see in Camp Road. There is a pizza shop. It's been empty for a long time, a long time. Compulsory purchase it and turn it into a community centre. It's right in the centre of town. Everybody can see it. It's easy to get to. Bob's your uncle. Of course, it does cost money, and that's the problem, isn't it? But I think it's money that's invested into the community, and it will pay dividends in the long run. And it'll bring a shop that's basically an eyesore back into use.
Thank you, Carl. Another different question. Grassroots representation is a bedrock of democracy. If elected, would you have regular surgeries to proactively engage with residents, encouraging inclusion? I'll ask Emily first.
Yeah, definitely. It's something, my husband's the current ward councillor, Liberal Democrat ward councillor, and it's something that we've been discussing actually. And we were hoping to do something in one of the local cafes on Camp Road. I think it would be a fantastic way to really get to know what's bugging people and what needs to be done. So yes, I would happily do that.
Thank you, Emily. Right, another question that I've got here. What would you do to support the businesses on Camp Road and Lynchford Road, particularly in terms of helping them to drive footfall? And I'll ask Emily first.
Yeah, so I think a good idea would be to do an hour's free parking in the Peabody Road car park, because that's going to incentivise people to come here. I mean, you drive through Frimley High Street, you can just pull up, pop into the shops, there's no parking, and we do that quite often. And I think it would be great if that was an option in North Camp as well. Carl mentioned the pizza shop and making it a community centre. I had an idea of making it like a big premises, so you could have lots of little pop-up shops, lots of independent businesses, you know, people that have made their own arts and crafts, things like that, just to bring more interest and, you know, give people more incentive to come. And then when they're here, we've got all our fantastic shops as well.
And the same question to Carl.
Hang on a minute, Chair, one moment. I didn't get to answer the grassroots representation question before.
Right, so right, go on to that then.
Can you repeat the question for me, please?
It's
grassroots. It was about grassroots representation. What I would do, I'm not going to remake the wheel. We have excellent councillors in, say, for example, Cherrywood and in Northtown and Aldershot. They have Councillor Gaynor Austin and Councillor Keith Dibble have an excellent regime going on in Northtown and Aldershot, where they sort out all of their residents' issues. They have a community hub where they come and speak to them, and they're easily contactable on their websites and Facebook. So I wouldn't seek to reinvent the wheel. I would copy exactly what they do. The second question, businesses, right? Okay, this is my vision for North Camp. I think Camp Road needs to be pedestrianised. I don't think, sorry, Emily, but I don't think you're right about dropping people off at the car. I think that's exactly the wrong thing to be doing. If we pedestrianise it, what that enables to do, it enables the shops like the cafes, the restaurant, sandwich shops, and that allows them to come out onto the street. And it starts to make North Camp, rather than it starts to make it a destination where you come to, and that increases footfall. But if you're just having people stop on their cars out on the road, that it's almost like a drive-by shopping. You jump out your car, go into one shop, jump in your car, go home. But what I'd like to see is it pedestrianised. So you use Peabody Road car park, and you actually get off and you out of your car and then go into the precinct, into Camp Road. I think that would be far better. Secondly, when it's pedestrianised, when you have all these nice tea shops, and a lot of shops have their doors open, but when the cars are outside running, it's when they're polluting the most. And I don't think that's really what you want.
Carl, I wasn't suggesting the spaces on the high street. I was suggesting Peabody Road car park.
Okay.
So that would free up those spaces. But a lot of people don't want it pedestrianised.
I know.
The people that live there.
I know. I'm just saying, but that's my vision. I agree that some people don't want it pedestrianised, but I think that it honestly would be best for getting footfall down the street is to make it a destination place rather than a place where you just pop into one shop. So you come down there for a coffee and you can see the delicatessen, or you can say, oh, I'll get the kids new shoes, or I'll pop in somewhere else. But as long as people are just stopping their cars, getting in, getting out again, it's not going to really increase footfall down the street, my opinion. But again, obviously, I accept your statement there that not everybody wants it pedestrianised.
Thank you, Carl. Now we're going to go on to the next question. If elected, what is the one thing you would most like to achieve in the ward? I'll start, Emily.
So what I'd really like to do is the community hub. I would love to be able to use one of the buildings that we have available and do something with that. As well as, which comes under the same umbrella, it would be to do a community garden with allotments. I think after seeing what I saw at Farnborough North Station, I just thought it was absolutely incredible idea, and I'd love to be able to do something like that. So we're keeping our green spaces, we're getting some community involvement, you know, bringing this community together, and that's what I would love to be able to do. Thank you, Emily.
And Carl.
Community centre. It's. I think that's. Hang on. Let me take a step back. There is a ton of stuff I would like to do in North Camp, and of course, I'm sure that Emily is exactly the same. But we'll have to be a little bit realistic. So I think not a too great a thing is to have a community hub. And to support the local people, where places for people from here can just pop around the corner and meet and have a cup of tea, or have a game of Monopoly with your friends in a room or something like that. I think that's probably the greatest thing we could do. That's for me personally, is build that sense of community. And I think when you build that sense of community, everything else comes from that. You start at the bottom and then you work your way up.
Okay, thank you. And I've had you both for that. Another question. From around 2001 to 2007, North Camp received a regeneration grant. This included a regeneration officer based with Rushmoor Borough Council, who worked with business, improving parks and co-organising the summer fair. If elected, would you campaign for a regeneration grant for North Camp? And I'll ask Emily first.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know why we wouldn't want a grant to help our local businesses and our community. I definitely would apply for that, yeah.
And Carl?
In a general principle, yes, I would do. But if, for example, say if Saudi Arabia were to donate £10,000 to North Camp Support Group, whatever, I tell them to stuff it. So it depends on whom the money comes from. As a general principle, yes, I would take regeneration money, but it depends on who it comes from.
Thank you, Carl. Now we've got another question here. What would you do to support young people in the ward, 11 to 18-year-olds? They have very few places to go or things to do. Emily, I'll ask you first.
So yeah, I think the community hub would fall under that, because that would give people a place to go, young people a place to go, and clubs to be part of and things like that. So I think the community hub is a massive part of what needs to happen in North Camp, because it's going to solve a multitude of issues that we have. Young people not having a place to go, older people not having a place to go, everybody, we need something, we need community centre. So I think that is the place to start. That's the way we're going to be able to sort these problems out.
Me next. Okay. Well, I agree with the community centre, but as the proud owner of an 18-year-old myself, I do know that they have absolutely nothing to do around here. What my daughter tells me is what she would like is things like she's perhaps a little bit old now, but what she would have liked was a skate park, a BMX park, football pitches, and not just football pitches, but football pitches that don't have great holes in them that you're running along that you can break your ankle. There are lots of things, but it again all costs money. There's very, very little of them, little that the children or young people rather than children can do that doesn't cost any money. So what we need to do is think really creatively about providing entertainment. That's perhaps the wrong word, but provide entertainment for young people that doesn't cost any money. And I think that's quite difficult. I'd be open to listening to anybody who's got suggestions on how we can do that. And I think the best people to listen to are the people themselves. So perhaps we could go around and speak and canvass the 11 to 18-year-olds and actually find out what they want. Because what I've got here is what my daughter tells me is a very specific example.
Thank you, Carl. Emily, have I asked you that one?
You have, yeah.
That's right. Okay. Another question. If elected, would you use your influence to ensure that the council's change action plan is treated with the urgency it deserves following several years of minimal progress? If so, what will be your main priorities to reduce the carbon footprint of the council estate and that of the borough as a whole? Ask Emily first.
Yeah, so I think one of the major issues is like idling cars and things like that, that would reduce the carbon footprint. So I definitely lobby to try and move it along. And, you know, we've all got targets. Have I cut?
Hello, everybody. I've just been in the background. We've been trying to work out what to do about Emily's problem with her internet connection, and I think it's not going to get better. And I think it's best. We've had a good 40 minutes or so. Some fabulous answers from all of you. Some excellent questions from everybody that has actually come along to involve themselves with this. I've got some questions up here. Would both candidates work cross-party to achieve outcomes? Some that weren't answered. That whilst we're waiting, can you tell us about any candidates who are not participating tonight? That was done at the beginning. Can both candidates tell us how a community centre would be funded? We already have a new BMX track. Why has both candidates decided to run for election in North Camp? The summer fairs have always been run by North Camp Matters, not the council. What evidence do the candidates have that free parking and walking only would work? What qualifications do they have? From around 2001 to 2007, I think we've had that one. Parking on Camp Road was put in to stop workers parking for free. Anything else? In June 2020, North Camp hosted a Black Lives Matter rally in response to the killing of George Floyd. How would you support the anti-racist movement in Rushmoor? There are some of the unanswered questions. Anyway, from us, North Camp Support Group, with the support of the Friends of the Earth, we've run these hustings. There are genuine questions. Real apologies for the glitches. We're going to come back next year, I hope, hopefully physically rather than through this Zoom. Carl and Emily, thank you for coming along. Jack, do you want to add anything else?
No, I don't think so. I just wanted to thank Carl and Emily for coming along. I don't think there was anything more that we could do this evening. And there is one other thing that I say on these. We thank the facilitators for the webinar. That's Friends of the Earth for providing the facility for doing this evening. Thanks very much.
Yeah, and a big thank you to all the attendees who came along,
Mm.
and I've tried to engage with them as best I can. Okay.